It's NFL Combine week, which means it's time to rank the Bengals' biggest needs. Where should they be looking closest this week in Indianapolis and all offseason long? That, plus a hot take on the way and much, much more right now on Enter the Jungle. Hi again, everyone, and welcome in to Enter the Jungle. He's Andrew Fox Miller. I'm James Rapien. Today, we are going to talk about the Bengals' biggest needs. Before we do that, a quick reminder that we're brought to you by Garage Beer. You can catch us every single Tuesday at 8 Eastern right here on the YouTube channel Cincinnati Bengals Talk, wherever you get your podcasts, and weekly on the FanDuel Sports Network. And Andrew, let's dive into the Bengals' biggest needs. And before we do that, full acknowledgement here. It's NFL Combine week. As you watch this, Duke Tobin's already spoke. Zach Taylor's already spoke. I'm in Indianapolis. We're recording this a bit earlier so we can have all your coverage from the NFL Combine. So if we don't reference something that Duke said on Tuesday, well, now you know why. Regardless of what Duke says and Zach says, there's some clear needs for this Bengals team this season, Andrew.
Oh, and James, full disclosure, I haven't even looked at the rundown you sent me 15 minutes prior to doing this. I'm just going in blind, baby. Let's go.
Going in blind. All right, here we go. Yeah, he's going in blind, and that's why he's going to probably be wrong with this first question. Maybe not. Maybe he's going to be right. We're going to rank the Bengals' biggest weaknesses today going into this offseason, and obviously there's a bunch of them that they need to address. For you, Andrew, what's their biggest weakness? What's the thing that coming out of the combine, coming out of free agency in the draft, you want to make sure that they address the most?
So this was really tough because I feel like anyone that thinks about Bengals weaknesses, Bengals needs, they're going to think defense. And obviously there are things on the offensive side. Of course, it's trenches no matter what. I was struggling between defensive tackle and guard. And because defense is a big need overall for this team, a big weakness overall for this team, I'm just going to have to, if I was going to go coin flip, I'm going to lead defensive tackle because so many things are impacted by that. Because we could talk about DBs, we could talk about linebackers, but if that defensive front is not doing what it needs to do, if it's not even remotely a threat, then a lot of things are going to fall apart. So I'm going to go with defensive tackle. Chris Jenkins, McKinley Jackson, drafted on day 2 of the draft last year, and they both had promising rookie campaigns. But are we betting that they're going to be impactful playmakers at this point? I mean, Sheldon Rankins gone, of course. BJ Hill's a free agent. So the need for talent, an interior pass rusher, it's at the top of my list in 2025. The good news is there appears to be some defensive tackle talent in this year's draft class. And the bad news, though, is that the Bengals have struggled with locking in quality defensive linemen for the future. So free agency is going to be expensive with defensive tackle, I feel like, but assuming you want a big name, I have to wonder if the failed Sheldon Rankins experiment also impacts the decision about free agency. But here we are. That's my number one.
Sure. I actually think that a lot of people are going to agree with you. I think that the Bengals probably agree with you. And the Bengals are wrong. You are too.
Boy.
Not that it's not a not that it's not a weakness. Of course it's a weakness. Of course it's a weakness. And it's number 2 on my list. Let's not get it twisted. But it's certainly not number 1. In fact, number 1 is the most obvious thing ever. And honestly, I don't think it's debatable. And here's why. It's twofold. Number 1, it's guard. And the reason why it's guard is because Joe Burrow is more important than anyone else in that building. And asking him to be Houdini in the pocket and dip, dive, duck, dodge, and dip and dive, or whatever it is in the pocket, I'm sick of it. I am sick of collapsing pockets. I'm sick of getting beat up the middle. I'm sick of not having a competent run game that can get a yard when you need to get a yard. That's why you got to bolster this guard position. And that's the first reason is Joe Burrow. The second reason is very, very, very simple. You're talking to the author of Enter the Jungle, the book. You can get Enter the Jungle wherever books are sold. Chronicles the entire history of the Cincinnati Bengals. Why do I bring that up? Because the Bengals have never prioritized guard in the history of the franchise. Never, ever, ever, never, ever. They've prioritized defensive tackle in the past, and they've gotten it right at defensive tackle in the past. Guard, they just forget about guard. It is just so irrelevant to them. Yeah, they've taken a first round guard here or there, like Kevin Zeitler comes to mind, right? Well, they traded down in that draft before ultimately taking a guard. They always dismiss it to a certain degree and will let their veterans, I mean, dating back to the 80s and early 90s, letting their veteran guard walk and sign elsewhere. That cannot continue to happen. They need to prioritize guard. And so, yeah, I get it. You want to get after the passer, getting that interior pass rush, love it. I would love for that to happen. I also think that protecting 9 and giving Burrow a competent run push. And the run game was better last year, and it had its ups and downs. But were you confident they could get a yard on 3rd and 1? I don't think anyone was. So for that reason, and for what history says, guard is their number one weakness. The good news is, I think there's some guards in this draft. I think there's some guards in free agency. I think you can address that without spending the big money that you're talking about at defensive tackle. And so it might be easier to fill, but I do think it's the higher priority, especially when you look at the guys we're going to be seeing this week at the combine. I mean, a lot of defensive tackles there, and certainly something you can address early in the draft.
Let me ask you this, and I know we're splitting hairs here.
Sure.
Biggest need, biggest weakness. As it stands right now, which is the biggest weakness? I'm curious if there's a difference. Maybe it's the same. You look at we'll call it, let's go bigger picture. Offensive line, defensive line.
Oh, well, I mean, the offense, you have Orlando Brown Jr., Amarius Mims, and Ted Karras. You feel good about 3 of the 5 spots.
Right. I'm not making a point here. I'm just curious on your thoughts.
No, so if you do it that way, well, then of course I feel that way. At defensive tackle, you have McKinley Jackson and Chris Jenkins Jr. At guard, you have a benched Cordell Volson. Cody Ford's a free agent. Who else you got? I mean, you could say Alex Kappa, but he's going to get cut. There's no way they bring him back. They're going to save $8 million the moment they cut him. So, yeah, I would say guard. What's interesting here, you don't need a long-term solution at guard. Like, it would be great. You can platoon it. You can do the Bengals tight end route where you go get Kevin Zeitler and you go get Brandon Scherf, one of those guys at right guard, and then you go find a left guard, and then maybe you draft one in the mid rounds. What really annoys me, I was saying this last year, and it wasn't just me. A lot of us were saying this last year about how important it would be to address guard in the middle rounds. I was talking about a guard center flex. They ended up getting Matt Lee. That's great. He fell later than I thought. He could be your backup center. You need a guard. And they haven't done that outside of Cordell Volson. They've just ignored it from a draft standpoint. That can't continue. And if it does, fine, then you better pay a couple of veterans that are plug and play type guys that are going to come in right now and start.
It's interesting you saying how, well, just for the lack of a better term, much easier it is to have access to a guard, which, by the way, is probably to some degree the Bengals' approach to it. The difference being they're not actually executing and getting someone that is going to be of quality, even if it's just a veteran that is average. It's not their approach because they didn't sign anyone at guard last year. They signed Cody Ford and said, that's it. And that can't be it. That's ridiculous. Dalton Reisner was just sitting out there. They could have went and got a guard and they could have went and got a defensive tackle. Their 2 biggest needs, they could have addressed that with very little dollar. I mean, you're talking probably $8 million total to get significant upgrades in those areas. And so that's why, look, Bengals fans, you're going to hear me and see me push the guard defensive tackle. Just when you think there's enough, you might see me in May saying, add another one. And they probably need to. I'm with you. Look, like I said, guard was so close. I was flip-flopping. I don't know what to go with, but I'm going to stand by what I said. And I'll just say you're wrong because it's fun to say it like that. No, I do think defensive tackle is harder to find, like this high-end pass rush defensive tackle. So, like, which one do you throw more resources toward? I totally get the defensive tackle element of it. You sign Osa from Dallas or you go after Milton Williams. That's more money. Either of those guys, that one guy, is more money than I would spend at guard total. I think you can find guards that are, boom, plug and play, going to instantly be an upgrade. At the same time, I just prioritize that, even though it's easier to find. So it's interesting because
I understand that you're going to have to spend more at defensive tackle and maybe use your first rounder at defensive tackle, even if you spend in free agency at that position as well. So we agree on their top two needs, even if we have them in different order: guard, defensive tackle. What's number 3 on the Bengals' weaknesses and their biggest needs going into the offseason? We'll get to that coming up next. Welcome back to Enter the Jungle. He's Andrew Fox Miller. I'm James Rapien. Catch us every single Tuesday at 8 Eastern right here on the YouTube channel Cincinnati Bengals Talk. Wherever you get your podcast, we are part of the Big Play Network. And Andrew, we agree. Trenches are the top two needs for the Bengals: guard and defensive tackle and guard. What's third on your list?
I'm continuing with trenches. I'm continuing with D-line. I'm going to go with defensive end, edge rusher. Again, we look at the draft in years past. Like, we all know that we still don't know what Myles Murphy is on this roster completely. I mean, he was obviously drafted in 2023, and the fact that we can't confidently say that's a problem. Maybe Al Golden or, new defensive line coach Jerry Montgomery will develop players like Murphy and help them align with their draft pedigree. But regardless, it's a big need. And I say all this, and we'll talk about this in a bit, I know, but what's crazy is that, like, this is a huge weakness, and defensive backs is still a major weakness to me, a major need to me, and I couldn't manage to put them in the top 3. I'm going with edge rusher.
Edge is certainly in the mix. I think you're going to move on from Sam Hubbard or restructure his deal. You have Trey Hendrickson, but until you sign him to an extension, you're talking about 1 year of Trey, unproven Myles Murphy, Sam Hubbard probably cap casualty and or bring back as a role player. Cedric Johnson, who I think is okay. But again, yeah, I think edge rusher is a need. It's a major need. And it's one that you need some impact out of right away. That's what's tough. It's not like you can just draft one, say in the second round. If that guy can't make an impact right now as a pass rusher, right now, then it's like you need it now. So from a free agency standpoint, keep that in mind, especially with the Bengals. They do have a lot of free agent cap space, cash that they can throw at the big 3, including Trey Hendrickson, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and then also add an edge rusher. I think it's really interesting because it's so dependent. Like, if they keep Trey but trade T, then not that they will, but if that happened, then wide receivers right there
goes up
among
for
the
sure.
biggest needs. So I think that this is such an evolution. We're doing this assuming, at least I am, that Trey, T, Jamar are all signed to long-term deals at some point this offseason. And so if that happens and you bolster the interior pass rush and you spend some resources there, well, then maybe you can get by with a Trey Hendrickson and a Myles Murphy plus a rookie in the first few rounds of the draft and work with it that way. But yeah, I do think bolstering this pass rush, that's got to be it, whether it's the edge or not. It's got to be a high priority. And so I'm not going to argue with you there that's number 3. And it would be nice to find a guy in this draft that can do both, where he can kick inside some and give you some interior pass rush. You can put him on the edge, some you can move him. He can be a little versatile. Hard to find those guys. But I also think that they're in the draft. I think a James Pierce out of Tennessee is someone that this week at the Combine is going to have to answer a lot of questions and concerns just about his attitude. And he certainly got the athleticism, the bend, the firepower on the edge that you're looking for. And so if he interviews well with the Bengals, he's a clear-cut candidate for pick 17. And who knows, maybe that's where they get their edge push from this offseason. But it's one of the many. And you mentioned it, you hinted at it, but I'm going to tease it because you had a big concern all offseason last year. It was brought up almost every week. It was like wide receiver for me. I think about wide receivers morning, noon, and night. You were thinking about this position morning, noon, and night. Are you still concerned about it? We'll get to that position coming up next. Welcome back to Enter the Jungle. I'm James Rapien. He's Andrew Fox Miller. And Andrew, you were as worried about cornerbacks as anyone in the Bengals room last year. I mean, defensive backs coach, cornerbacks coach Chuck Burks probably wasn't as worried as you. You brought it up on every show, it felt like, at one point or another. You wanted the Bengals to add a veteran corner. They didn't go that route. And now you got my trade video on Monday. I mentioned Cam Taylor-Britt being a potential trade candidate where who knows? I wouldn't give him away. If you get a 4th rounder, might consider it for a 4th rounder. And I really like Cam a lot. Check out that video, by the way, or that podcast if you're looking for more of an explanation there, because this isn't about that. But how are you feeling about the Bengals cornerback room right now?
I want to be clear about one thing. You talk about how I talked about cornerbacks, DBs in general, specifically cornerbacks, as much as you talked about wide receiver. The difference being I don't want to have to talk about cornerback. I want to talk about wide receiver. That sounds more fun to me, but here we are. And to answer your question, it's the same. Nothing really material has changed since really, well, I wouldn't say this time, but heading into training camp of last season. Cam Taylor-Britt, we thought was going to be a different Cam Taylor-Britt in 2024 than what we got. And we lost Dax Hill. I was saying all that we desperately needed some help at cornerback, veteran presence, something more in the draft. And it's the same roster, except people are recovering from it. You know what I mean? Like, it's the same. It's insane to me that I feel the same way and I couldn't bump that into the top 3. I don't know. I feel like I should be panicking more with that thought, but I have a very strong need. If I'm the Bengals, I'm doing everything I can, free agency and draft. What are you going to do? What are you going to do at cornerback? They cannot do what they have because they tried it and it didn't work and nothing's changed.
Well, the thing that sucks is Dax Hill got hurt.
Right.
He looked like a number 1 guy. I mean, really did. And I've been bullish on Dax. Outside of his own family, I'm not sure anyone's more bullish on Dax than me. Maybe the Bengals front office, but I think it's close.
Don't let the Bengals get too comfortable thinking the same way as you, though, right? So
they should try to think
on
like
potential.
Me. They should try to think like me. It would help. But yeah, people are going to think that's crazy, and it's not. I do think that the Dax injury is what makes it really complicated. Because you could sell me on Dax if he had continued to ascend last year. You could sell me on Dax and DJ Turner. And then you have Dejon Anthony in that nickel spot or Josh Newton in that nickel spot. And then you draft one or you sign a veteran or just Cam Taylor-Britt comes back and he's the one starting. You know, like you could sell me on Cam being the 2 if Dax is your 1. Right now it's like, well, Dax is coming back. It's going to take a little time.
You're losing Mike Hilton. I forgot to mention that.
Free agent Mike Hilton. I think we kind of know where that's headed. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough because it's a need. It's a big need. If you're not fully confident in Dax being able to start right away. And I think that's why they'll address it either in free agency or the draft, maybe both. Would not shock me if they use their 1st round pick as of today, their 1st round pick on a corner. Wouldn't shock me. Now, do things need to transpire between now and then for that to happen? Sure. Could certainly happen. 2nd rounder, I think it's certainly in play. They've drafted Cam Taylor-Britt and DJ Turner in the 2nd round. Would not shock me if they use the 2nd round pick on a corner. But we got to your thoughts. Now it's time for Hot Take James. Hot Take James returns next. Welcome back to Enter the Jungle. We're going to get to Hot Take James in just a second. I'm James Rapien. He's Andrew Fox Miller. Before we do that, 2 positions that the Bengals are looking at extremely close this week, and every NFL team will be looking at extremely close this week: tight end and running back. We haven't talked about those yet this episode. I want to bring those up because those are the 2 deep positions. Defensive tackle, deep. Running back, deep. Tight end, deep. The Bengals are going to be looking at those positions because they're really deep in this draft. I think there's a bunch of starters at running back, bunch of starters at tight end. What say you? When I just say that, does that make you cringe knowing the needs on defense and corner and all of the above?
A little bit. There's a little twitch. I mean, look, you obviously got to get some quality to spell Chase Brown. I'm not going to deny that. And I would love a playmaker, a difference maker at any position, but certainly at running back. But tight end, I get a little weary. I would love a solution at tight end. I know they need to find something to really, help with the fact that Gesicki likely won't be here. It still could be, but assuming he isn't, I just don't see a scenario where they're not going to take a tight end like they've been taking tight ends, where they have like a centerpiece in that tight end room. It just feels like they keep adding certain role players at that position. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, it does. And here's the hot take. I guarantee you 1,000% the Bengals will draft a tight end in a running back in this year's draft. 1,000%. Book it, bookmark it again, and then book it again. There's a bunch of starters at tight end. There's a bunch of starters at running back. There are guys that they need to address. It's 2 positions of need. They are huge needs. Tight end's a huge need. Mike Gesicki's a wide receiver. So you have Drew Sample and you have Cam Grandy at tight end. Okay. And then at running back, you literally have Chase Brown. Sometimes you just got to say it out loud. I know people don't value those positions as much. And it's like, oh my God, the Bengals have 6 picks. It's why we did that trade video. It's like, yeah, you could get another pick or 2 if you trade this guy or that guy. So check that out. But yeah, the hot take is simple. Buckle up, because the Bengals are probably going to take a tight end and take a running back with 2 of their 6 picks. And it might not be in round 6. It might be in round 4. They might take a tight end in round 2. They might take a tight end in round 1. That's not out of the realm of possibility. With Loveland out of Michigan or Warren out of Penn State, the Genty kid out of Boise State at running back is certainly going to be in the mix if he falls to 17. And so there's the take, is buckle up, because it's not as simple as defense with the occasional offensive lineman. It could be, but as of now, at the end of February, it's not. And there's your hot take. Buckle up, Bengals fans. The Bengals have a lot of needs, and they're going to be able to address them in this year's draft and in the offseason. But as of now, tight end and running back very much in play in the 2025 NFL draft.
We got to hit on this free agency. We got to hit on this free agency, James.
No matter what, no doubt. They got to get it right in the draft and free agency. For Andrew Fox Miller,